everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, this afternoon, for the last conversation around the film program titled The Body Undone, A Conversation with Loss. Today, we're speaking with filmmakers Madonna Adib and Carol Nguyen. I'm so grateful and happy that they both could join us, as well as indebted to them for sharing their riveting short films, Let My Body Speak and No Crying at the Dinner Table. I hope the participants had the chance to watch these films that were online until 4 o'clock today. My name is Sana, and I have curated the film program for the Embodied Arts Festival hosted by Oyoun, Berlin. Before diving into the conversation with the filmmakers, I wanted to give a bit of context to the film program and the films that are part of The Body Undone, A Conversation with Loss. For me, this program has really been a journey of sort of self-reflection on trying to understand what the ideas of embodiment and memory mean to me outside of inherited ideas, and to discern for myself and for my own body what embodied memory feels like in my body. It hasn't been an easy process, but I've been very grateful through my research to have watched films which allow me the space and time to acknowledge the feelings and emotions that have come up during this process. I began my reflections on embodied memories looking at the works of a poet by the name of Meena Kandasamy, and she's from India, the writings of the American author Christina Crosby, and a queer Indian artist by the name of Balbir Krishnan. And I specifically wanted to look at the emotions of loss and grief. Their work, along with the selected films in the program, helped me map new areas of inquiry and pose questions that were away from sort of the conventional outlook on the linear notions of loss's predestined path, especially in a culture that is frantic for resolution. And instead, I wanted to look at loss as holding social, political, and aesthetic implications for the body. A loss that doesn't rely on the linearity of time, but that is very profound, intimate, from the deep spaces of oneself. And I then wondered that from this position of embodied knowing, whether we can re-engage with loss, and that re-engagement could generate sites for memory and history and the rewriting of the past and the reimagining of the future. And could this engagement with loss, the irrecoverable, somehow paradoxically become a condition of new anti-colonial hope and agency? I focused on storytelling from new voices, especially those of women. And most of the films look at various sorts of losses held by different bodies. And I hope they've allowed the viewer to meditate on the idea of loss being inseparable from what finally remains. This conversation is being streamed live via Oyoun's YouTube, Facebook, and Vimeo channel. So for all of the participants who are joining us here on Zoom, please mute yourself during the conversation. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. And for those that are watching on the live stream, you can also send us your questions via chat. I will begin by introducing Madonna Adib, the director and writer of Let My Body Speak. Madonna Adib was born in Damascus, Syria in 1986 and received her BA in Fine Arts from the University of Damascus in 2008 and a BA in Film Animation at Concordia University in 2012. She creates experimental documentaries which have screened internationally in festivals and art museums. Her work revolves around LGBTQ+ rights, identity, and migration. She is one of the 6 founders and photographer in the project Syrian Eyes of the World. In 2016, she worked as a photographer with the Canadian National Board of Film Board, for a film shot in Beirut about the Syrian refugee crisis. Currently, she has 2 films in development, a short fiction about the LGBTQ+ community at the beginning of the Syrian revolution, and a feature documentary about 4 Syrian women who leave their families and take off their veils. She lives in Beirut and works as a freelance writer and filmmaker. For those of you who haven't seen her film, Let My Body Speak, it is a personal and intimate journey exploring the repression experienced by the filmmaker during her childhood when she faced sexual control in Damascus, a city that was also experiencing a growing socio-political repression in the late 80s, early 90s. Through the creative use of family archive mixed with current footage of her own body, she reconstructs the pain of the past absorbed by her body. Let My Body Speak had its international premiere in IDFA in 2020 and has since received the Best Arab Special Selection Award at the European Independent Film Festival. The film will also be part of Hot Docs Film Festival this year. Could the Oyoun team please play the trailer of Let My Body Speak?
أخذتني أمي عند طبيب نفسي، قال عندي ستريس. لما سافرت صار جسدي هو أرضي الوحيدة، هو الشيء الوحيد يلي بملكه. صرت فيق جنب النساء يلي بحبهم.
My other guest today is Carol Nguyen, who's a 23-year-old Vietnamese-Canadian filmmaker based in Toronto and Montreal. Her films often explore the subjects of cultural identity, family, and memory. Filmed as part of her film studies at Concordia University, her most recent film, No Crying at the Dinner Table, premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and had its international premiere at IDFA in 2019, where she was additionally invited as the opening night speaker. In 2020, No Crying at the Dinner Table also received the jury prize for short documentary at South by Southwest. Carol is a 2018 Sundance Ignite Fellow, Adobe Creativity Scholar, and a TIFF Share Her Journey Ambassador, where she strives to empower diverse voices and women through her own stories and personal experiences in the film industry. Over her last several films, such as Every Grain of Rice, Tundra, Facade, and This Home Is Not Empty, Nguyen has been finding new ways, whether experimental, dreamlike, or indirect, of cinematically reckoning with family dynamics and the real weight of living through one's own history. Currently, Carol is working towards developing her first documentary feature as well as an animated short. For those of you who haven't seen Carol's short film, it is a heart-wrenching, cathartic piece where the filmmaker interviews her own family to craft an emotional, complex, and meticulously composed portrait of intergenerational trauma, grief, and secrets about things left unsaid. The film is a striking depiction of what families avoid discussing and what can happen when those taboos dissolve. Could the Oyoun team please show the trailer of Carol's film? Thank you.
Mai xin muốn chơi interview của mẹ bái chị Hiếu lại. So just nghe and vậy thôi.
So both your films are, I mean, very distinct in form, style, and context, yet connecting them are these very personal, layered, and raw accounts of your own families, their histories, your memories, identity, belonging. And what I found was also this idea of how can you navigate through these emotions and find spaces of sort of acknowledgement of everything that comes up when it concerns the past. There is a strong physicality and emotion in how we remember our memories, and it comes through so beautifully in both your films. For me personally, watching both your films, it was sort of a sense of release within my own body. I had to sigh many times, and I felt like there was a lot of things that I was able to let go of. So I want to begin by thanking you for making not only really beautiful work, but personal stories that matter. Welcome to this and conversation. How are you guys doing? Where are you? What are you up to in these crazy times? Madonna, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. And you, Carol?
I'm doing well in Montreal right now. Everything's going well.
Given the pandemic as well?
Given the pandemic, we're in our third lockdown, so we'll see where this goes.
And you, Madonna, in Beirut, which more than the pandemic, there's other things as well happening.
Exactly. This is the last thing we were thinking about. After the Beirut explosion, nothing matters. So no, it's summer here. Yesterday I was on the beach. It's cool.
Oh, I'm jealous. Yeah, I saw you in your little tank top, and I was already like me and Carol in our sweatshirts here. It takes a real courage to, shoot a film about yourself and your family. The stories are very personal, yet at the same time, the topics that you've touched upon, I think, can resonate with people around the world. I want to start this conversation talking about the genesis of your project and how you decided to tell these very personal stories. Carol, do you want to go?
Sure. So this was a third-year university film, and going into the school year, I thought I was going to make a fiction film. And I had originally planned a story about a 3-generation family, and through the fiction film, we discover how love assimilates through each generation. And so while I was doing my research and approaching my family, asking them about how they felt living in a 3-generation household, I discovered their stories. And they were stories I'd never heard before. and stories that resonated with me very deeply, because I had also had a traumatic experience that I had not shared with them, that I thought it was just a single experience for me. But that's when I learned it was a collective experience, and something that we had been conditioned to do through our family, and perhaps through cultures, and sometimes immigrant families, where language becomes a barrier, and also culture becomes a barrier. And sometimes things such as crying can be seen as negative. And that pulled me back to my memories of when I was a child, and my mom always telling me, no crying at the dinner table. But if you want to cry, you go to your room, but eat all my food first, because that would be offensive to leave uneaten food at the dinner table. And so I had then approached my family about this film, and they agreed without any hesitation. My family's been in several of my films before, even when I was in high school. So to them, it was, they were used to the cameras, they were used to the film set experience. And they had a relationship with me as a director. So, and that was basically the seedling of No Crying.
And did your, the statement that your mother made when you were upset of no crying at the dinner table, did that just directly come to you when you were thinking of the title for the film?
I can't remember, because it's been 2-3 years now since the conception of the film. But it was a pretty easy process to come up with the title idea. I find that there are two films. There's like the films where I know the title right away, which was No Crying. And then there are those that you have to find, along the process. Yeah.
Okay. Madonna, what about you? What began this project of deep introspection through your body for you? You're silent.
Okay, thank you. Well, it all started as a personal need to tell what happened in the past. And then I started realizing how much we need to talk about such subjects that are considered taboo in this, in our region specifically. And then also seeing the consequences of all this secrecy on my personal life, on my body, on other friends. So, and then I started also seeing, or I started thinking that it's a need to stop normalizing social oppression and stop taking it as a sacred tradition that is saving society. We also need to be aware about how it's linked to the political oppression. So I thought that, yeah, I'm gonna start from myself, because this is the only thing I'm sure about. So I started digging in the archive of the family and remembering the mental health problems I had that I wasn't aware of, remembering all the details, all the bullying I was facing without knowing. And yeah, I got there. It was a natural process.
And the title?
Okay, titles of my films usually come at the end. So it was also an organic thing that happened, like, yeah, let my body speak, actually, because I'm talking about the trauma that is in my body. So, yeah.
And do you normally begin the films by thinking about themes, or does the central story come to you first? How do you go about it?
Depends. Usually there's something I want to talk about. I see some scenes, I know what I want to talk about, and then the story starts to build up.
And in your case, Carol, how is it? Themes first or central story?
I guess I began with the themes first, because I didn't know that this was going to be a documentary in the first place. But the themes had shifted along the way. After the 3-generation idea, it then began to shift to mental health. And then after the mental health idea and going through the experience, I discovered the word intergenerational trauma. So I think I started from a very big pool of ideas, and then narrowed down to what the film really was in the end.
And can you tell me, I mean, a bit about the team? Because of course there's your family as the main characters, Carol. But there seems to be this camaraderie within the team, especially in the last shot. You hear more people, you come into the frame. Was it out of necessity, number one, to direct your family members as part of your film? And also, what was the dynamic like within the team that your family members were able to be so vulnerable with them?
Yeah, I think, this being a student film, we had to work within the restrictions that we had. So certain number of shoot days, only a certain number of days for my team to get to know my parents and my family and do research. So that being said, we had to make sure that the set was a safe environment for them, that only the necessary people who were needed for that scene were there. So after everything was shot for the interviews, it was only me and my cinematographer in the set. For the bigger scene, it was me, my cinematographer, and another camera guy, just to make sure that there were no technical problems. But my family's comfort level and their safety in being vulnerable was always our priority. And you asked another question. I'm sorry, I forgot that one.
No, I also asked about just like and I think this touches upon being that it was a student film, that your characters ended up being your family. I mean, your mother has played, and your sister Michelle has also been in your previous films. But I was wondering if that was like out of necessity, or how did that start out? Directing your parents.
For No Crying, once I discovered their stories, I couldn't find anyone else. These were their stories. So it wasn't out of necessity, but it was purposeful. For No Crying, for Every Grain of Rice, which was a film I also made in university, that was purposeful too. But I think what I'm learning as I make my films with my family is why I choose to use them. And I think at every step of the way, I'm starting to open up with them more as a daughter and as a filmmaker. With No Crying, they didn't really understand the film until I finished it, because this was kind of a message that I didn't know how to say to them, that I created this experience for them to understand. There was a fiction film that I created called Tundra, where I used my mom as well, but that was there was no other Asian Vietnamese actors, Vietnamese middle-aged women actors for the script. So I ended up using my mom, which speaks about, I think, some of the diversity issues that we have in the industry. But as I grow, I want to expand beyond my family. And as I create fiction films, of course, that means using actors and other people.
Madonna, your work, of course, is extremely personal. You were naked in the film, which you've directed, you've narrated, you've performed in it. And you were naked metaphorically, but also physically, very raw. What was it like for you to put a team together, to be sensitive to your own emotions of filming your own body?
Yeah, that wasn't the easiest thing, to be naked metaphorically and like literally. The team was very small, only the DOP and her assistant. I wanted them to be all queer and women. And yes, those are the two people. There was no sound on set, and that was a plus for me in this situation. This is about being naked physically. Being naked metaphorically was a big part of it. The producer, she was great, Nguyen. She's amazing, because she pushed me out of my comfort zone, but without being invasive. And that was very smart and there's a fine line between these two. So because I tend to hide, maybe anyone would have done that. I tend to hide sometimes. It's embarrassing sometimes. It's hard to be that vulnerable, especially when I know that it's going to be screened in front of people. So yeah, but she played an amazing role with this. It wasn't easy.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about this, that you knew that your film was, both of you knew that this very private work was going to be public. And this question also came up yesterday during one of the conversations with another artist whose piece was more performance-based, of as a filmmaker and artist, how do you sort of negotiate and navigate between the personal and the public, and where do you, draw the line? So Madonna, how was it for you knowing that your very, very personal life, not only your life, but also your body is going to be on big screen? And what were sort of the feelings that went through you?
Well, there are choices. Like, for sure, this is not all the reality. I chose what to show and what not. I pushed myself, no one helped and everything, but there are certain things that are really for myself, very personal, that I hide. Because I'm not I'm not gonna open everything, but for sure, like each time I know that this is what I want to tell, I need someone to push me more, to tell a bit more, but at the same time, yes, to hide what I really want to keep for myself. It's a very tricky question, and it's a very tricky choice to make also.
Yeah, as a filmmaker, I mean, because your film also obviously speaks to a huge community, not only within Syria, but around the world, whether they're women, whether they're queer. And, to know where to say, okay, this is personal and this I don't reveal to the public is, I'm sure, a very hard line. Carol, how do you sorry, go ahead, Madonna.
Because if I also just put some things that are not so personal and that are like common with everyone, it would have been also boring, because what am I telling? Because everyone knows this. What am I telling? What am I adding?
Correct. Yeah, totally. Carol, how do you navigate between the personal and the public?
Just like Madonna, I had to decide what I wanted to keep for myself in the edit. And that's when I discovered that my film wasn't about the conversations itself, but what happens after this film. And you really don't see what happened after. The conversation in the film we excluded, because I decided that that is, what we were here for in the end. And also that was the more vulnerable part than the interviews themselves. Because, this is the part that is totally non-scripted. And what I mean by that is, we all knew on the day of that we were coming to set to tell a specific story and to discuss a specific thing, but we didn't really know how everyone would react after that. And so that vulnerability I wanted to keep for my family, because this was the beginning of a very long journey that we have to work on every single day. So I think in documentary, you capture so many vulnerabilities, but you really have to prioritize which one is for you, which one is for the public, and which one might be on the verge, and why you want to place them on each category. Do they make an impact?
I think we get a glimpse of that in your film in the ending scene where, your mother is crying and your sister puts her arm around her, and there's this really intimate scene there. And there's a glimpse of, this sort of what possibly could then the discussion go forward to within that family. And you talked about the editing process right now. And I was just wondering for both of you, I mean, one thing is to shoot the film with really difficult topics, but then to go into the editing room and watch it and rewatch it, what is that process like as a filmmaker? And how is it to, go over these emotions again and again? And what do you decide what to keep? Carol?
So our film ended up being 15 minutes, 40 seconds, I would say. And we had 5-6 hours of footage. So it was going through all those interviews, rewatching it, cutting down the fat, rewatching it again, and seeing what is the core of each interview, and then also finding a similar structure for all 3 of the interviews to interweave. And I think there came a time, because this film is so personal to me, that I became a little numb to the footage, and trying to figure out more of the technical than the emotional aspect. And that's when we really had to find a balance about, taking a break, coming back with fresh eyes, who to involve into the process, and who might not be so useful. So I think it's a little dance and a little balance you have to play to figure out who the right partners are for the edit. And for us, that was a lot of breaks and a lot of people who were close to us who had a technical eye for cinema, that didn't know my family, that could see it from an outsider's perspective to help shape the structure of the film.
Madonna, how was your editing process? Was it as difficult as the shoot? I can't even imagine.
I thought the shoot was hard, but no. It was, the first few days were horrible. Sitting in a dark room with the editor and a big screen, watching yourself naked for 8 hours is not fun. Then choose what you want to choose from this. First few days were a bit hard. Then I got used to it. So it became, yes, more technical. The archive was also hard because sometimes it's cringy in front of someone else. Sometimes it's embarrassing. So, but yeah, I also got used to it and started to be technical. I mean, like when I see something related to mental health, yes, now it's good with the story or not. I stop seeing it as my personal story, because otherwise it will drive me crazy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Have your parents seen the film?
Yeah.
How did they respond to it?
They both liked it a lot. My mother was like, I didn't know that these events happened. Why you didn't tell me? She apologized that she wasn't aware of everything that was happening. I'm like, no, you don't have to apologize. This is what you knew back then. My father, he didn't say anything. He just got sad.
Yeah, it must be difficult as parents, because I mean, there's a lot of your mother, I think, there in that, especially when you talk about your stress and being taken to a psychiatrist and they're asking you why you're stressed and things like that. So I was just wondering how your parents responded. And of course, Carol, your parents are in the film and have probably watched it after, and what was their response to it? And they've also, I mean, your mother and sister, like we've talked, have been part of your films, and kind of your characters in many of your films earlier. How did they respond to your film once they saw the final product?
My sister cried. My parents, they asked to watch it again, but they weren't really, they were a part of the experience, so they knew what the film would be. I think for them, they didn't understand the universality of their stories until the public saw it, until we had our premiere at TIFF and they saw, physical reactions on people's faces, and they're like, oh, okay, this is important. It's not just our family. So they liked it and they were very proud.
Yeah, and have you been able to show it to more of the Asian diaspora, or even in Vietnam, for example, the film?
We have. We're very lucky that, with the pandemic, a lot of the things were online. So we were kind of able to cross borders. So a lot of the Asian diaspora, I was really proud when the film premiered online and, people could watch it online for free. And so I felt just so heartwarmed that so many people could relate and see their own family in mine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you talk about physical intimacy, actually watched your film when I first came across it and curated it, watched it with a bunch of Indian girlfriends, and we all resonated about this lack of physical intimacy in many of our families that your mother talks about so beautifully and so poignantly. So I think it's such a universal story, and also brushing things under the carpet and not really discussing things that are essential in a family is very common to maybe the Asian diaspora. I wouldn't know if it's common in the West. Madonna, what about your film? Has it been shown in Syria? Or no?
No, of course not.
Online?
Anyway,
Do
no.
people have access online? Or?
No, they don't. Some of them, when they ask me, I send them a private link, and some of them just attended in virtual online.
Yeah, online screenings.
Yeah, but yeah, there's no place anyway to screen it in Syria, and I don't want that to happen, especially politically also. But yeah, and yeah, they can have access if they go online and attend a festival or ask me personally. But otherwise, how would it be?
And in Lebanon, have you shown the film?
No, it's also the COVID helped. The COVID played a big role of not showing it like in actual physical space. So
but
I
when
know
you
later.
What was sort of the response of audiences, let's say at IDFA? Because you did show online at IDFA, correct? Last year.
Yeah.
And did you have people from the community like write to you, or?
Yeah, a lot, yeah. A lot of people, like I've heard a lot of positive comments. At the same time, I've had some clashes with some people who were patriarchal back then and still in Syria, and they were like, "Oh, you're exaggerating. Maybe you were happy. This is not so true." I'm like, "What?" So they're still in denial of everything, which is sad. But this is why we need to keep talking about this.
Totally. Let's talk about the visual treatment of your films, guys. Madonna, you use some extremely, of course, extensive close-up shots of your family, and then this combination of like archival material and images. And there's also, these screechy sounds, these repetitive sounds that are used in the film. What went behind sort of the visual treatment and the audio, the soundscape of your film?
It was very essential for me to have my body very soft with the shooting to be very smooth and soft, to be a bodyscape shooting, because the whole idea of the film that this is the only land that left that I have, and this is the only thing that I own myself, and actually I re-owned it after leaving. So that was very essential to have it as a land, very soft land. And in the contrary of having the very rough archive, which is rough in the content too, the sound, it's like something how it's repetitive in your head. And also when you have OCD, things got in loops. So this is the sound that is always repetitive and in loops in my head, and it's very annoying. And at the same time, there's the climax of the film. There is this sound of the shaving machine. So this is that escalates and then pop, it cuts. So I wanted all these to be repetitive, and mix of this shaving machine, then to cut it and to sound the sound of the nature with the bodyscape. Yeah.
And was this a long process to kind of figure out how you wanted to show your body and the footage?
No, the body at the beginning, before shooting, I knew it, because technically it needs to be figured out before the shooting in terms of light and the camera, the lenses, and the movement. So yes, this is the only thing I knew. And then the other parts have been discovered while editing, while editing.
Carol, your film, of course, also has very close-up shots of your family during the interview process. But I really like sort of the juxtaposition of your fictionalized shots, where I think the play with the spaces, the color, the kind of walls that you have in your homes create this physical distance, which you were also trying to relay emotionally that is there. Talk me through sort of your visual treatment for your film.
Yeah, I think I'm a documentarian who plans a lot. And I like to write documentary scripts beforehand, which is, very loose interpretation of events that I project that will happen or that I plan to shoot. And so for the film, everything was storyboarded, everything was planned out. There were even things in the house that I had wanted to change in the art direction or visually change. For example, in the kitchen, we had a square table. So for the film, I wanted it to be circular and to be a collective experience. In the bathroom, the wall was orange, which made my sister kind of look orange, almost too tan, like a fake tan. So we had changed the walls for that. And so I had already come up with the concept and the scenes that we were going to shoot, and intentionally worked with my cinematographer to figure out, exactly how each shot would be captured the day of, so that on the day of it was more like a fiction set. But all the concept and everything was already there and planned out before production.
And the fictionalized scenes, did they come about organically, or how did you sort of decide to put them in there?
I wanted each member of the family to have their own room and to do something that is natural to them. So for my mom, that was obviously the kitchen. For my dad, that was the living room. And for my sister, who hadn't been home in so long, I could only picture her in her bedroom, but I wanted to reserve those intimate spaces for the end. So I decided one thing that my sister does that my parents didn't know about was she smoked. And what space in the house would she go to do that? And I figured the bathroom. So it is fictionalized, but they aren't acting because they're doing exactly what they would do as their own selves.
So has the secret about the smoking finally been let loose in the filming process, or no, is that still a secret?
My parents thought it was an oregano cigarette because that's what we told them. I'm pretty sure that they have discovered throughout, the process, but I think it's just something that they just don't want to talk about because they don't want to bring up that tension. So they're like, we don't know, but of course, I'm sure they do know at this point.
Yeah, it's so common with Indian families. I think a lot of us also hide these things. And I'm sure, I don't know, what about you? Are you still having lots of secrets with the parents, Madonna?
Not at all. No,
not
anymore. Also at the age of 35, 34, it's why we've been like apart for 12 years now. Now when we meet as friends. So no, there's no need.
It's interesting because you do have, Carol, in your film these gestures or like mundane tasks, kind of these everyday tasks, which like you said, your mother cutting the fish or washing the bok choy, your sister taking a bath, your father lighting the incense. And I feel like the distance between them is not only created in the mind, but also through these bodily sort of gestures of everydayness. What do these like quiet, repetitive moments evoke for you when you looked at them in the film?
For me personally, I wanted them to represent moments where you're alone and your mind just wanders off. And if you catch someone in this moment, if you're lucky enough to get a glimpse, you're probably wondering, I wonder what he's praying about. I wonder what my mom is thinking about right now as her mind zones off. And I wanted to capture these moments for each of the characters in a very meditative state, to contrast that with their interviews, which was the opposite, stripped down. You can hear all of their thoughts in that moment. And better emphasize the facade that exists between them.
Madonna, your body of work is definitely the body being so representative, and this body that sort of is growing up as a young girl in Damascus that longs for women, your breasts, you're feeling them being as unwanted parts of your body. And of course, the central sort of idea of you being punished for not complying with this very patriarchal, repressive society. Before the film, was it already part of your work where you looked at, the memory that was held by your body as part of an exploration of your past? Was it something that was always there?
It wasn't formed in this clear way, but yes, I've been working on the body, women, and queers since 4 years now. So yes, this subject and these things are in my mind, but not clearly this way, like this film. They take different shapes, let's say.
When did you realize that, the body has stored so much memory within your own body? Like, how was that how did that come about?
I think it started with the mental health. When I started having this kind of depression and OCD, then it hit me. How was it in the past? And then I made the link. So yeah, I think it started from there. And then all my care about my body, how I like my tattoos to be, how I play sports. I play a lot of sports, and so yeah, I want my body to be in a certain way that I like. So I started rethinking about how I see my body, and re-owning it. And that was
All good.
Yeah. And yeah, that started from the mental health program.
Okay. Both of you go really deep into your past, the past of your families, your own cultural histories. I was wondering, like, what was the process like for both of you outside of being filmmakers, just being people, daughters, sisters? What was the process like for you? And also, I was wondering, because I've been playing a lot with this idea through all these films, is that when you look so far in your past, like, and think about memories, there's this blurring of lines between what is real and what is imagination, because there's such a gap maybe in your memory. And I almost wonder, like, what was the process like for both of you going back in your past and trying to recollect things? Madonna, do you want to talk about it? In this case, how maybe your body remembers differently from what your mind remembers?
Well, it's interesting. I love these gaps in the memory, because you fill in these gaps the way you want. You fill them with emotions. Sometimes you fill them with unreal events that you think they're real, and it doesn't matter now if they're real or not, because this is the way you remember them. So filling in the gaps the way you want is something very interesting, I think. Also, there's another thing that I did, is to ask for the facts that happened. And even though when I ask about the facts and it doesn't match my memories, sometimes I choose the memory. Because this is how I feel, and this is what's important, what left. So the feeling is the what is left from the past. It's not the actual fact.
And do you feel like what your body remembers and what your mind remembers is drastically different?
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay.
Your body remembers the trauma, and you keep feeling it. So as I said, it doesn't matter what actually happened. Because if you feel this way, then this is the reality. Emotions are facts. So that's it.
Carol, how did
Oh, sorry. I was just going to comment. I think it's really interesting what Madonna said about how you can, paint your own narrative in those memory gaps. I think it's also interesting when you dissect those memories and think why, like, this wasn't really what happened or the complete truth. And I think truth is very subjective, but why did I choose to tell my gap this way? And sometimes it's just, you need to convince yourself of one thing that maybe is false, but you do it for your own guilt or your own regret or your own desire to put some to psychologically put something that's missing there. And I think for No Crying, as soon as we started to talk about our feelings and our memory gaps and how we interpreted these moments, we were able to finally tie the strings together and find more of a complete picture as everyone, talked about their piece of the puzzle. And I think collective memory is so strong because we're able to read in between the lines and read everyone's story and figure out why each person decided to choose that specific memory, that specific narrative. And I think something powerful that happens when we are able to do that is sometimes we're able to go back and change that memory and figure out a different narrative for ourselves.
Absolutely. That's very well put. And I think that's what I was also trying to figure out through this film program is how can, while dealing with loss and grief, how can one go back and can one go back and reimagine sort of the past and the future for us, especially looking at bodies of people of color, of different ethnicities. So yeah, I also think what your sister Michelle says in one of the scenes is that, we never actually stop mourning. And that is the crux of sort of my film program, which is, there is no end to grieving, and this idea that there is a linearity of this kind of emotion, that you go from point A to point B, or these supposedly 7 or 5 stages of grief. I think Michelle puts it so beautifully. And a lot of your films have looked at this idea of grief and trauma and loss. I wonder how this this visual medium of film has helped you articulate your own voice over the years to express things maybe that were hard for you to talk about, and how you've used the medium.
I think when language is a barrier, in my family, and even when language is a barrier in more metaphorical sense, like you can't find the words to describe, images and sound are always universal. Even the amount of time you decide to stay on a specific shot tells the viewer something. Do you want it to be painful? Do you want it to be quick? Do you want it to seem calming? And I think film has helped me articulate what I couldn't say often, or even the words I didn't have at the time. Like I didn't figure out the word intergenerational trauma, what No Crying was actually about, until a film programmer wrote that word in a program book. And I was like, oh, that's what it is. This is what I was trying to describe. And so I think film, because it allows us to touch on so many art forms like music, sound, images, art, we're able to take everything and collect all the senses that we feel from this one feeling, this one word, this one theme, and just throw it in there and create something a lot bigger than what we had originally had in our heads.
And you've been filming from the 9th grade, is it true?
Yes. I discovered it in my high school film program.
And did you always wanted to be a filmmaker? Or?
No. I think I wanted to be a businesswoman when I was younger. And it wasn't until I discovered how therapeutic filmmaking was, this therapy that I never had when I was a teenager, that made me realize how powerful storytelling was. but I came into filmmaking just kind of oblivious. I thought I would, the furthest I'd go was maybe be a YouTuber or a blogger, but as it turns out, I discovered something more beautiful.
Madonna, you also play with other mediums. I think you paint, and you, of course, are an animator. How does the visual or the medium of film help you to sort of talk about your own identity?
Yeah, it evolved. First, I studied fine arts before studying filmmaking. So I wanted to say something through art, but obviously I wasn't sure how. So it evolved. I started with paintings and then video arts, some video arts. Then I went to Concordia. I studied animation. I started animating, and then from the animation, I jumped to documentary because I thought that okay, this is where I want to be doing documentaries specifically and fiction, but not animation. I switched from animation. So I think it just evolved to the medium I love more, and it was a discovery journey. It wasn't clear from the beginning. And yes, I played with different mediums, and I'm still open to play with other mediums if the subject need, but because also the subject tells you how to do it.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a bit about your relationship with Syria. I know you left in 2009. But, you know, like you said in the film, when I left Syria, my body became my only land. It's the only thing I own. Have you been back since? And can you talk us through a bit about how Syria shapes your identity, if it does?
Yeah. Yeah, I always go back. I visit, I see my parents when they're there. Uh, but the thing is that I don't belong in there anymore. I don't have friends. They all left, and there are few things left to do there for
Mm,
me because I don't have a life there anymore. It's been a long time. When I was young, like I wouldn't have been this person if I didn't grow up there. But
mm,
at the same time, yes, now I wouldn't live there anymore. But but it's it's sad that I had this kind of oppression when I was young. But at the same time, I'm happy to go through this so I can tell what I'm telling now, and
mm,
I can be aware of things that I wouldn't be aware of if I didn't face. And saying this, I think I have a privilege now that I can talk about these subjects without being threatened. So, and I'm happy that I faced these things, and I'm lucky enough to leave and to be able to talk about this.
mm-hmm. Carol, you hadn't been back to Vietnam until 20, or had never been to Vietnam actually until 2019. Is that true?
That's correct.
Um, what was that like? I mean, your parents were refugees in the 1980s during the war. They left Vietnam, and you obviously never been back, but been growing up in a family of Vietnamese. You obviously, I guess, were grown up while growing up, had ideas of what Vietnam was, and then you went there in 2019. Was that a conflict between what people had told you about Vietnam and then what you actually saw? And yeah, talk
Of
me through that
course.
experience.
I had so many identity crises.
Yeah.
I had a moment where I just cried on the street because I was just like, I don't know if I belong here.
Yeah.
But you know, never having gone until I was 21, I had a collection of stories 40 years old that my parents told me about that I thought Vietnam was. And of course, you know, Vietnam is just a Google search away, and I could see the city and the landscape and everything. But these stories, because they are such a vehicle for empathy, I had gone to Vietnam with kind of rose colored glasses of trying to discover these places that I had in my memories that my parents described to me. But of course, you know, everything is gone.
Hmm.
It's a completely new city. So I had to kind of re understand what Vietnam was and where my parents' Vietnam, or my memory of what Vietnam was, even fit into the picture. And of course, what I thought was Vietnamese, I didn't know if I was completely Vietnamese when I had come there, and had to reevaluate what my meaning of home was, and where I fit into the world. So it was so confusing. And I think it's confusing for many people when they return to their motherlands.
Yeah, and I think you flew back right after and gave a speech at ITFA.
It was in the middle of my trip.
Because I remember hearing that opening night speech, and I was like, wow, this is the first time she's gone to Vietnam, and like emotionally it must have been like really hectic for you.
Oh yeah, a lot of tears.
Yeah, I can imagine. You know, talking about identity and sort of authentic representation of stories, I mean, both of you are filmmakers of ethnic backgrounds and women of color. I wonder if you think about, you know, whether or if you have a fear as filmmakers of making stories that are very culturally and identity specific, and if you suddenly become like shrunk down to that sort of one metric in terms of a filmmaker, or is it liberating for you almost to tell these very authentic and relevant stories from a voice that knows these kind of identities well enough, and comes from, you know, a very strong perspective and experience, where, you know, through this you can actually overturn sort of dominant narratives of maybe what it is to be a Vietnamese, or what it is to be a Syrian, what it is to be a woman of color. So where do you feel like you lie in that framework of, as a filmmaker? Do you fear being kind of bogged down into this one, like, oh, she only makes films of this sort? Or is it liberating for you? Carol?
I think I consider myself very early on in my career right now, so I feel both. I want to change the narrative, and I want to create different stories of the Asian diaspora out there now, and create better representation, more diverse representation. But I also fear being categorized into only doing documentaries with talking heads, or I don't consider myself my documentary one with talking heads, but or just creating, you know, Asian stories, whatever that means to them. But you know, I am someone who also wants to push my craft. I want to explore different kinds of forms. My next film is an animation. I'm doing a fiction. So I fear that being boxed off too. And I think that sometimes it's universal and inevitable, regardless of your ethnicity. If you're a horror filmmaker, sometimes you get boxed off into that. So I'm trying to navigate that right now, and see if there's something that I can do. But for me, I just want to do everything. So I personally don't consider myself within that box. Perhaps Madonna can answer, since she has a more established career.
Well, being smaller or shrunk down just because I'm talking about my identity, my color, my everything, is very problematic. A white man can talk about his experience with sex for his whole life, and people almost worship him. So just now, being a woman, a queer woman, a woman of color, talking about identity, about this oppression, it doesn't make me smaller or shrunk down. It makes me more courageous and liberated. And yes, I don't want to think that I've been put in a box because I'm talking about this, just because this is a label thing people tend to do when a queer woman of color talking about identity at the same time, compared with white men doing this, is whoa, it's God.
Yeah, but that's what we're like sort of like resisting and trying to, overcome these sort of barriers through, and I guess you as filmmakers, I guess, and Carol, you've talked a lot about representation and gender parity and sort of equity and equality. And do you feel like there is a movement? I mean, there's a lot of hype and noise, I feel, around this, but I still feel, to make such a hullabaloo when there's like 50% represented filmmakers. I mean, this should be the norm. I mean, why are we still, for me, why are we still making such a big deal? How do you feel about it? And I know a lot of your work goes on these issues.
I think that it's still very problematic. We have huge representation issues and diversity issues depending on what country and what region, which film industry you talk about. And diversity looks different in every city, every country, every local community. But I also see as a whole that we are making progress, and I'm one of the generations to benefit from that progress, to grow up with Fellowship for Women and film festivals that are specifically focused on Asian stories. So it's also very exciting to see that and to be living and entering the industry in my early career while this momentum is going on. I hope it continues, and I hope it continues with good purpose. But I also see that there's a lot of capitalistic intentions behind these decisions, just going with a trend or thinking that people want to see certain faces or certain decisions being made, but just making them for that intention and not necessarily having the people of color behind their backs or behind the women's back. I think it's also very telling or to tell diverse stories and who those executives are, who those producers are. And sometimes that and it's very putting on a face to show change, but the root is still the same.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Madonna, do you have anything to add about this root of the patriarchal industry that you work within?
Well, not much. It's a constant fight. Well, it's not only in this industry. It's a patriarchal world. It's a man world. So yes, it's just a part of it. So it's a constant fight in every detail of the life.
Your team was specifically, you said women and queer, right? For this film?
Yes, there's only one man who's feminist, who's an ally. Yes. I prefer working with women because of many things. I think women are very strong and very good with what they do. And specifically, DOP women are amazing. And with a DOP man, with a woman director, could have a conflict a bit because his male ego sometimes plays role. So I prefer working with a woman DOP and women in general. Yeah, because I'm talking about women, about myself, about my body, and this is my space and our space to talk about ourselves. There's sometimes no space for men to be there, and that's okay.
And is your future work going to also be connected to similar topics, or can you tell us about what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm now working on 2 films, a short fiction. There's also about queer community in Damascus at the beginning of the revolution. Shot with the same DOP of this film. It's Elsie Hajjaj, is amazing. And another feature documentary, yes, you just mentioned at the beginning of the introduction. Also shot by the same DOP. We're friends and we're good with working together. Yeah, these are the main 2 projects that I'm working on. On the side, I'm working on a visuals for a play in Switzerland and another visuals of an opera in Belfast. But as films that I write and direct, yes, there is these two films.
And how's the context of living in Beirut and what is happening there sort of affect your work?
I don't know if it's affecting my work or it's affecting me.
Both. I think they're related.
It's not so easy, but I'm well surrounded. We're a group of friends who are supportive to each other, and we're creating kind of a bubble, a safe bubble for ourselves, because it's really depressing being here. So we go out to the beach, we do some small stuff, we do gatherings at home. We're like a few people, and yes, we can survive the city. It's a beautiful city anyway, but it's sadly destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You, Carol, what's going on? I know you mentioned an animation project and a feature doc. Is it following the same sort of lines of your work from the past, or are you embracing new waters?
So the animated short is about that identity crisis that I had spoken about earlier. My feature doc follows my family as they go back to Vietnam for the first time and discover the life of their schizophrenic brother, who had passed away. He's the brother that my father talked about in the film. So that's been a big mystery and taboo because he died by suicide, and schizophrenia was even something that my family didn't understand completely, because mental illness is so taboo in the Vietnamese community. And then finally, I have a fiction short going into production this fall, which briefly talks about the lives of an aunt and her niece as their grandma, the matriarch, is lying on her deathbed, and how their lives would change after that.
The feature doc with your parents, is it actually your parents returning to Vietnam for the first time since they left?
Yes, since 40 years.
Wow. That is definitely going to be another tear-jerking, emotional Nguyen film, huh?
We'll see. It's going to take a lot of emotional labor too.
Yeah, I don't see any questions from our audience. Please don't be shy. You can write them in the chat, or you write them to me directly, or you can come on to Zoom and ask us. Yeah, if there are any questions. I think my last question for both of you is, where do you find inspiration in these challenging times? Madonna, I know you live in a very challenging city, but beyond Beirut, what inspires you? What keeps you going?
I've never thought about this as an inspiration. Just like there are enough materials in our lives and in this world that deserves to be spoken about. So just if you look around, there are plenty of things. That's why also my first choice most of the times is a documentary, because there's no need for me to create fiction when there is such a huge things happening. Sometimes I do fictions when I cannot recreate, like this queer community at the beginning of the revolution. So as I said, the subject creates the medium. But yeah, I don't think it's an inspiration. You just look around and there's everything.
You, Carol?
I would agree. I feel like there are so many stories, even though sometimes I hit the same topics. Stories that you can tell from different dimensions and with different characters from different perspectives and different memories. It's been difficult during the pandemic for sure, because of quarantine, because of less socialization and less physical collaboration. So often I find inspiration from non-film things to keep me more focused while I do my creative.
Yeah. Thanks so much, ladies. I think it's really the need of the hour for stories like yours that are so vulnerable and resonate with a lot of not just women but people around the world who wish that they could be seen on screen like you and haven't found representation before of things that we don't talk about or are taboo. So thank you so much for your work and for sharing them with us, and I'm really curious about all your new work and wishing you well and good health. And thank you to the Oyoun team for hosting us. And yeah, I guess we can end now. So
thank you, Sana.
Thanks a lot and have a wonderful Sunday. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Lots of love. Bye, guys.